Hey folks, so here I am doing a first video in a while, slightly different angle. Uh, this might look very different from what you're used to seeing when I do a video, but in reality, I'm only a few feet away from my usual angle. I'm just not sitting at the computer, I've got my iPad in front of me instead. And I know there's a bit of glare on there, but if I turn I really need a certain amount of light here to see what I'm doing. And I know it's creating glare behind me, despite the fact that it's New Year's Eve. Um, Behind me are my lights that were all set up for Halloween, and to me, it's still Halloween, even though it's December 31st. So I still haven't taken down my Halloween decorations. My Halloween lights are on. I leave them up all year, to be honest, with my little tiki heads and my various Halloween figures. One of the things hanging there is actually, they're about this big, a little set of skeletons that you really can't see them. But trust me, they're lights and they're hanging on the same string as the orange lights are on. And my tiki heads, those are my tiki heads. So last minute, I thought I would do a video. I don't know how the sound of this is going to come out, mainly because I'm doing this a bit of a distance away. So I hope it's going to come out okay. Wanted to do a year-end video. I haven't done much videos in 2020. 2020 hasn't been a good year in general, to be honest, for a lot of reasons. And the big one is a lot of musicians died. A lot of people died. And usually you could probably, on any other year, you could probably do a year-end video and speak about all of the musicians that you liked, not all of the musicians who died, but all the ones that particularly affected me or you as a person in the course of the year. This year, there's so many musicians who died that are people that I absolutely adore and have for decades. Most of these musicians I got into in the 1970s who passed away this year, and I can't even list all of them. A couple that I don't have anything to show by. Ira Sullivan, who is a mainstream jazz saxophone player and trumpeter. Annie Ross, the singer from Lambert, Hendricks and Ross, is another one. She had a pretty good long life. And some people, looking over a list, there's a few people that I was unaware that passed away. And I'm only dealing here with a handful of my favorites. I want to make a short video. So I'm skipping over and missing over a ton of people. Here's one guy that I wasn't aware of, no mention of it in the news or anything, until I saw a list. Classical guitarist Julian Bream. Julian Bream passed away. Wasn't aware of that. I tried finding mostly people I had vinyls by. Few I couldn't. Some people I'm not going to talk a lot about because I don't want to do a 90-minute video. A big one, Lyle Mays. I wasn't even gonna mention Lyle because he was probably the best known musician out of all the ones I'm going to show. But considering how shocking his passing was, because he wasn't an old person and nobody knew that he had been ill at all. All they had known is he hadn't been playing much. Probably somebody this guy's a big deal to me, but I don't think too many people really know him. Very experimental, electronic, for the most part, composer. I only found that after he died that he'd been teaching in colleges. A lot of these experimental electronics guys, they can't make a living doing this kind of stuff because their record sales aren't going to be up there. But I found out after he passed away that one of my big heroes, this guy Richard Teitelbaum, experimental electronic composer. There's just a couple albums by him. I didn't go digging out everything most of these artists. I just dug out one or two albums I had. Richard Teitelbaum passed away. Turns out he was an instructor at a college. I think it was in upstate New York, so not incredibly far from here. Somebody I'm not sure I even heard about at the time. Another guy, another one of the Heath brothers. Unfortunately, saxophonist Jimmy Heath passed away this year. And we lost Percy Heath, his brother, a number of years ago. And interestingly enough, I just happened to select this album. But on this Heath Brothers album from the early 80s, Stanley Cowell, who played with a lot of people, but he played with the Heath Brothers a lot as well. Stanley Cowell, the keyboardist, also passed away this year. And that was something that I selected this album, and then I realized, looking at the personnel on it, oh, Stanley Cowell passed away as well. Excellent, excellent jazz pianist. Very wide-ranging, too. Another one that shocked me and upset me, though he wasn't an incredibly young man, McCoy Tyner, the great jazz pianist. People know him, I guess, mostly with, being the... This is one of my particular favorites, Trident, this album Trident, which is just a trio. McCoy Tyner on piano. He also plays the Celeste on a few tracks, which I think is the only time he did it on record that I can find. And I really like that, the sound of that in a trio with Ron Carter on bass and Elvin Jones on drums. A hell of a band on this Trident album from 1975. Most people know him as the pianist with Coltrane, but man, I'd rather hear McCoy on his own as a leader. Another guy who passed away, great saxophone player, Lee Conants. I selected this album, the IAI Festival, which is independent artists record label that Paul Bley, who passed away, I don't think Paul Bley passed away this year. I think he passed away the previous year. I can't keep track of how many people we've lost just in recent times. Lee Conant's another one that passed away. This is one of my favorite albums. It's just a short little live performance with the various artists, 4 artists that recorded for the IAI label that was only around for a few years in the late 70s. But this album has Bill Connors on it, Paul Bley on piano, Lee Conants and Jimmy Guthrie on saxophones and flute. I love that album. Love that album. Another guy, the last surviving member of the single best-selling album in jazz history, Miles Davis's Kind of Blue. This is the 50th anniversary edition of it. This is the album. I love the album. Don't get me wrong. It's by far not my favorite Miles Davis album. However, I have bought Kind of Blue more times than any other album, simply because of the numbers of times it was reissued. I bought it originally on LP. Then when CDs came out, I bought the CD edition. Then a second CD edition came out with an extra track, a different version of one of the tracks, and I bought that. And then they came out with another edition on CD that had more alternate takes, so I bought that. Then they came out with another CD edition where they had corrected the speed of it. It turns out all the previous LP and CD editions, the master had been cut at the wrong speed, so everything was slightly out of key in terms of you couldn't play along with it because it was somewhere between the pitch of the keys. So then they did that edition. So I bought that, and then I bought this huge box, which this thing weighs like, I don't know, 50 pounds. It's a heavy box edition of Kind of Blue. And then there's another version I have on CD, which is a dual disc, which I didn't pull that out, but the dual disc was very short-lived but interesting. It was a standard CD on one side, but they printed stuff on the other side of the CD instead of just having a label. And they would have videos, generally videos on there, short videos about the making of the album interviewing anybody that may have been around, such as engineers and musicians. So they have the dual disc of Kind of Blue, which if you're not going to go for that huge 50-pound box set thing, if you could find some remaining copies of the dual disc, it's a format that never caught on, but I don't know why. I absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. So Jimmy Cobb, the drummer on Kind of Blue, passed away. Classic era of Miles Davis. Some of my favorite music came out of that era, that Jimmy Cobb was the drummer. Paul Chambers would have been on bass at that time. Bill Evans and Wynton Kelly were on piano, alternating kind of through the years. Coltrane was in and out of the band at that point. I forget the name of the other saxophone player. Cannonball Adderley was also one of the saxophone players. But, there's another one, and I can't think of his name now, that played on the Friday and Saturday night at the Black Hawk, which is another classic Miles album. Jimmy Cobb had led his own bands for years. The last one, Jimmy Cobb's Mob, he led for a number of years. Now we get to some big guys that really, really affected me. A guy that's not so much known for... I got to flip through my records here. Oh, no. I don't believe that just happened. Hold on, because the vinyl fell behind the furniture. Oh, man. And I can't even get it. I don't even know what album it was. Hold on. I got it. I can't believe that happened. All right. So everything's out of order now. But am I going to do a retake? So a guy, my favorite drummer in the world, passed away, John Christensen. More known as somebody who played in bands, not so much a solo career. He played with Keith Jarrett in the 70s, late 70s. I think it spilled into the early 80s, but also Ralph Towner's Solstice, one of his better known albums that he played on. Certainly one of Ralph Towner's most loved albums. Here's Jan Garbrick, Bobo Stenson Quartet album that John played drums on. He was the original drummer for Eberhard Weber's Colors group. Played on the Yellow Fields album. And I think he's only got two albums that actually came out with his name on them. He was in a group where he was an equal member and did some writing for the group called Mescalero, who did I only have one of their CDs. The other ones are out of print. Very hard to get. Even though they're recorded for ECM, ECM has not kept them in print. Mescalero is a great band, by the way, with Harold Anderson on bass. And here's a couple examples. The only two examples I know of where an album actually came out under John Christensen's name, and that's the Rarum compilation selected recordings, which came under John Christensen's name, even though these are just selections that John made himself of some of his favorite work for the ECM label, supporting other musicians. So none of these were actual John Christensen solo albums. It's just John Christensen playing with Keith Jarrett and Ralph Towner and Terje Ripdal, Eberhard Weber, people like that. The only real album that I ever saw came out with his name on it was this duo album with Dino Saluzzi, the bandoneon player. Came out 2005, I think it is. And that's this, which I only bought because I'm not a huge fan of the bandoneon as an instrument, but it's interesting because it's just a duo. It's just a duet with the bandoneon player, Dino Saluzzi, and John Christensen on drums. That's a real interesting combination. It's got my favorite drummer, so I had to get it. Another guy that I just found out that died that certainly wouldn't make the news because I don't think he was all that well known. A guy named Jamie Merritt, who was a bass player, probably best known for playing with this guy, Max Roach. I don't think there's a picture of Jamie in here. No, there's no picture of Jamie in here. But this is what I call Max. One time I did a video on this album, Max Roach Drums Unlimited, which was recorded in the late 60s. And to this day, I refer to it as my Christmas Eve album because one year in the early 1980s, before the CD era came along, it was kind of like a not great time in my life. And on Christmas Eve, I decided, last thing, man, it was like late afternoon, maybe even like 5 p.m., 4 or 5 p.m. So stores were starting to shut down. And I was driving around, and I decided to stop in a record store, not in a mall, just a standalone record store, before they closed. I don't think anybody was in it. And I just decided, I'm going to treat myself. It's Christmas Eve. I'm feeling kind of down. And I just didn't know anything about this album, didn't know who played on it. And I just said, damn, that looks interesting. Late. I could tell from the cover and the styles and everything that it was a late 60s album. Jamie Merritt plays bass on it. He passed away this year. And it's one of my favorite Max Roach albums. One of the reasons why it's got, I think, like three short drum solos on it. 3 short pieces written just for solo drums. And I couldn't see any of the titles of the songs on it because the record was sealed, and they didn't list any of the songs on there. And I bought this Christmas Eve, and I go home and I open it up, and one of the tracks, interestingly enough, is called In the Red, A Christmas Carol. And I thought, wow, that's really weird serendipity, that coincidence that I bought that on Christmas Eve. And it was the only album I bought that night I walked out with. And I didn't even know if I was going to like it, if it was any good. And it turned out it's a great album, which of course I bought on CD now. Two other guys. John Christensen was my favorite drummer. One of my favorite bass players in the world passed away. Gary Peacock. I'm just going to show 2 of his albums, 2 of my favorite albums. Voices from the Past, which is interesting because it's Gary Peacock on bass, Jack DeJohnette on drums, and 2 horn players. No harmonic instrument, no guitar, no piano. And it's very interesting. And they don't think they do any overdubs either, so it's just the 2 horns, bass, and drums. Gary Peacock recorded a lot of piano trio albums, piano, bass, and drums. To me, when he went outside that area, it was his more interesting stuff. And he actually did 2 albums like this. He did 2 albums with a lineup of 2 horns, bass, and drums. It's one of my favorites, but my very favorite, and the only time he ever did this, December Poems. I love this album. For the most part, Gary Peacock solo. Jan Garbrick plays saxophone on 2 of the tracks on here, but the rest of it is just Gary Peacock solo bass. Recorded December 1977, which was a big year personally for me in my life. It's obviously his most sparse album, being just bass solos. Don't recall there being any overdubbing either. And if there is, it's only on maybe 1 track. So it's going to be a weird experience listening to this now, because I've been listening to this album since 1978. And, every time I put it on, I had the knowledge that Gary Peacock was still around, still alive. And now he's not. And especially with a solo setting, a solo album, for the most part, like I said, Jan Garbrick does play sax on 2 tracks. But on the rest of the album, Gary Peacock was the only musician creating this. So, I always thought, if I could ever interview or speak to Gary Peacock, this would be the album that I would ask the most questions about. He wasn't known for it. He didn't go out and do solo bass albums. He never did solo bass performances, unlike another one of my favorite musicians who thankfully is still with us, because in the past 5 years, most of my favorite musicians have passed away. But Bar Phillips, another bass player, who has done also solo bass albums, like I said, who's thankfully still with us, did a lot of live performances of solo bass. Gary Peacock never did, to the best of my knowledge. So, that's why this particular album which sounds really nice on CD because, you know, it's a very quiet album. That's why this album is very unique, and it's going to be a weird listening experience listening to it now, knowing that he passed away. The last guy, certainly not the least, actually probably my favorite, one of my favorites. I only picked one album to show. I could show a million things. Harold Budd, who passed away very recently. Harold Budd, the keyboard player, synthesist, one of the creators of ambient music, minimalist music, passed away from COVID of all things. And he had been very active right up until the end. So despite his age, and I think he was in his early 80s, despite his age, he was not in declining health at all. He was very active recording in the last 5 years, decade or so. At one time, he did claim to have stopped recording, but he retired from recording. But that didn't last very long at all. I don't even know if that lasted a full year. And that was a number of years ago, maybe about 10 years ago now. After that point, he started recording again, and he just never, he was on full-fledged, hard to even keep up with his album releases, to be honest. So that was a shock. Harold, all these guys were a shock passing away to me. Harold Budd, because he was so prolific in recent times, that was a big surprise to me. And the guy that I discovered in about, I want to say 1978, and I never have stopped listening to him since then. So I just wanted to pay homage to just a few, not even all of the guys that I liked that passed away in the last year. Forget about like the last 5 years. I'd do a video, it would be 9 hours long. But I wanted to say something about these guys and appreciation for their work, and how for me it's going to be difficult and a totally different experience now listening to their music at this stage, now that they've passed. But such is life, I guess. So if you've all gotten over your shock that I did another video, Happy New Year to everybody. Let's all hope that 2021 is better. It's almost got to be better. And that's about all I have to say. So take care, everybody, and hope you're all doing well. And I'll come back and do another video at some point.